The topic that was given to me was different types of exercises in obesity. So let's get going with that. This is just a picture of a hospital in Mumbai. It's called the Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital. So the outline we had planned was obesity and exercise, what works, exercise intensity, talking about exercise prescriptions, special precautions, and conclusion. So this is what I had planned to present, okay? Then I spoke to Dr. Shilpa 3-4 days back, and she said, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? So you're going to see none of this. So if you like what I'm going to present, thank me. If you don't like it, please talk to her. Okay, I'm just kidding. Let's go. So, you know, when we're talking about obesity and exercise, this was a cover in Time magazine some years back, the myth about exercise. And what they essentially said was that exercise is not great as a weight loss tool. Okay, so that's what they said. And before we start, actually, will you remember this number, 2880? Yeah, 2880, okay? So they were talking about exercise, of how it's not a great calorie burner. And a lot of you in the audience are nutritionists, and you know very well the sort of caloric content of food. And if I tell you the caloric content of exercise, it's very low. So the rule of thumb is that if you walk or even run 1 mile is 1.6 kilometers. For an average 70 kilo person, you'll burn roughly 100 calories, which is probably 1/10 of a plate, right? So you're going to have a hard time burning it off. However, exercise and obesity shouldn't be viewed only through the prism of weight loss, okay? Let me show you 1 or 2 of these slides related to that. In the Cooper Clinic in Dallas, in Texas, America, they've had a long-standing study called the Aerobic Center Longitudinal Study, where they've been looking at people right from the 70s onwards, and they've been tracking them till this day. And they've got a vast number of data. This is just one from them. What they essentially are looking at in this study is what we're calling fitness-independent benefits to the obese person. So both the groups, in this case, both are obese, defined as BMI over 30. Okay, this was the low fit group, and this was the moderate and high fit group. And you can see a distinct drop in mortality if you are fit, even if you're heavy. Okay, so that's why they had a whole series of studies, and then they came up with this whole concept of can you be fat and fit? And the answer was, it sounds controversial, but to some extent, yes. Then they looked at the same thing from muscle strength. And again, they found the same thing. Both the CVD mortality and all-cause mortality drops as, how do we go back? Drops as you get stronger, okay? And one of the best take-home messages from all these studies was that the biggest bang for your buck, as they would say in America, is when you jump from the least fit just to the next category. So you don't have to be super fit to get the benefits of exercise and fitness. Just by moving out from the lowest third, or typically they looked at quintiles of activity. So moving out from the lowest quintile to the next one, you get the biggest bang for your buck, okay? As all of you know very well, there's a big difference between weight loss and maintenance of weight loss. And I'm sure this is going to be a repeated theme throughout today and probably tomorrow. And we know that weight loss, we do it typically in a specific period of time, while maintenance, frankly, is a lifelong process. Weight loss requires a negative energy balance. Reduced caloric intake is critical. However you do it, whichever diet you may follow or not follow, ultimately you do have to have reduced caloric intake. Physical activity not required as much, and I've specifically put as much in inverted commas. So it's not like it's not important, but it's not going to be a major component. If you ask me, rule of thumb is it may contribute to about 20%, while the food will contribute about 80%. And it's common, meaning lots of people have good amount of weight loss, but weight maintenance is rare. So physiologically, again, all of you know that if you lose more than, say, 30 odd pounds, to try and maintain it for a long time is very difficult, because you also have a hypothalamus sort of thermostat in your brain which kind of fights weight loss beyond the point, okay? So once you put on weight and you lose it, it's hard to keep it off. Okay, so some of the questions that were thrown at me, okay? So one of this whole thing is, do you burn fat only at low intensity? And you got these machines in the gym which will say cardio zone, fat zone, and all of that, okay? So let's kind of look at what it says. And I call it the fat burning misnomer, because it is true that high intensity exercise uses only carbohydrate largely as a fuel. However, high intensity can be sustained for short periods of time. And post high intensity, you also end up using a lot of fat as fuel, okay? So that's important. The total volume of exercise is very important, your duration into the intensity. And then we look at something called excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It's EPOC for short. So earlier we used to call it oxygen debt. And I'll quickly walk you through this slide, which is looking at effects of exercise intensity on the fuel mix that you select, okay? So this is at 25%, 65%, and 85% of VO2 max. So essentially at very low intensity, using much more of triglycerides and the plasma-free fatty acids, and as you go rightwards, as you get more intense, you end up using more of the muscle glycogen and plasma glucose, okay? So it is true, and if you ever measure it in a metabolic cart, you see the RER or the RQ starts going towards 1 when you're burning carbohydrate, and it's 0.7 when you're burning fat. But if you look at actual amount of calories burned, often when you're going at a higher intensity, your total caloric expenditure is more. So then what's the answer with an obese person? My simple rule of thumb is first increase the duration. Once you get the duration to a reasonable, let's talk about 40, 50 minutes, which is reasonable, it's practical, you can do it for a long period of time, then keep on increasing the intensity till the maximum so-called tolerable by the person, okay? There's no magic formula, just it's sort of a rule of thumb thing which I'm telling you. This is how we measure it. So if you actually look at gas exchange, post-exercise, what happens is you end up consuming a lot more oxygen than you would normally predict, because during the exercise, this part is called the so-called oxygen debt, which then comes up in the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, okay? So therefore, they say you burn more calories throughout the day. Now, again, a caveat, you don't burn that many more calories throughout the day as people imagine. So you can't do a 10-minute quick high-intensity bout and then think whole day long is just a calorie burner, okay? It doesn't happen that way. I like this line. It says, no matter how slow you go, you're still lapping everybody on the couch, okay? So my repeated take-home message to everybody working with obese people is, let's not get caught up in science, let's not get caught up in data too much, get the person moving. And if you can get the person moving long-term, you won the game. Otherwise, you can give whatever detailed prescription you want. If they don't do it, they won't. I like this tool a lot. It's called the rating of perceived exertion. It's how hard the individual feels they are working, right? Sometimes you have an objective measurement, you'll measure their heart rate typically. But it's not always easy or practical to measure heart rate. So how hard the person feels. And ideally, they should be somewhere in this 11 to 13 zone, fairly light to somewhat hard. Sometimes we even call it the talk test. Okay, so light intensities that when you're sort of exercising, you can actually sing without any effort. That's very light. Moderate is you can speak in full sentences, but you cannot sing, for example. Vigorous is you can speak only a few words at a time. You're slightly out of breath. And maximum is you can barely speak, right? So ideally, you want the person to be in the moderate zone to sustain it for a period of time. Okay, next question. What about high-intensity interval training, okay? People say that HIIT is a hit, so is that right or wrong? So we got an expert speaking on this in the next session, so I'm really not going to go too much into this subject, but let's touch upon it since it's relevant. So basically, interval training is alternating periods of intense effort with moderate effort, right? So the interval. Now you can vary many things. You got things like Tabata, which are even few seconds at a time. An interval could be 5 seconds, an interval could be 1 minute, an interval could be 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. So there's lots of things you can vary. You can vary the interval time, you can vary the intensity of the interval, and you can vary the time in the so-called rest or the moderate period, okay? So lots of variations, which I'm sure we'll hear in the next session. Why is it supposed to be good? They say it increases your metabolic rate, helps in optimal muscle building and muscle retention during the fat loss, and increase calorie burn during and after workouts. So that's the reason why it's supposed to be good. Some drawbacks are it may be too stressful on the skeletal and joint system. Someone who's obese, it's not that every obese person has not exercised, but there are higher chances that they've not really been exercising frequently, and they start high intensity, they might get joint issues. So you've got to be careful. Sometimes if they don't regulate their blood sugars, you get sort of a roller coaster ride. Muscle aches, pain, breathlessness, adherence tends to go down. The harder you push someone, typically adherence goes down unless they're young and they end up enjoying it and they want to stick to it. So that's something to be wary about. Okay, commonest excuse. What if I don't have time to exercise, okay? Again, research has shown that even if you don't have 30 minutes, do it for 10 minutes, because this is a Mayo Clinic study showing reduction in heart disease just by 10 minutes of exercise versus 20 versus 30. The aim out here, the goal is not to tell everybody 10 minutes is good enough, but the other way around, that even 10 minutes helps, okay? So that's important to keep in mind. Can you caption this one? Yeah, sitting is the new smoking, right? So we got to get people to get up and move as much as they can. And people are doing practical things, standing desks. This was a patient of mine who he heard this at a talk, and he got a standing desk for himself. He heads the BSF for South Asia. Okay, people, this common thing when you're dieting, what about a cheat day? Can I, cheat day for diet, a cheat day for exercise? How does that work? And I often talk to people, do the math. If, let's say, an average person is eating 2,000 calories a day, dinner would be what, 600 calories? But you come to a nice conference like IDEC, there's great food in the evening, all of that. It's possible that instead of 600 calories, you could fairly easily consume 1,500 calories. That's not too difficult, is it? You have a drink or two, 2,000 possible. So now you're 1,400 calories in excess of your 600, okay? 1,400 in excess. 1,400 calories means how many miles? 14 miles, okay? Roughly 22 kilometers. So here's the message. You have to exercise 22 kilometers more the next 7 days only to get rid of Saturday night. 22 kilometers more, not only 22. Supposing you're anyway doing 20 kilometers, so now you've got to do 42. So that's why you can never win that game, okay, if you're going to go berserk. So sorry to spoil your Friday evening, but that's something to think about. Okay, so I'll show you one more math or exercise. Let's say somebody's in city of Mumbai traveling by a good old BST bus, and they're upward mobility in life, and now they want to get a vehicle, okay? So let's do the math. A man and his car, or a man and his two-wheeler. Let's say the bus stop was only 1/8 of a mile, okay? 200 meters away from the house, so literally right next door. So he walks 200 meters to the bus stop, he goes to the office, gets off, walks 200 meters to his office, and same way in the evening. So in the whole day, he's walked half a mile, just to the bus stop and back, which is 50 calories. Not a big deal. Let's assume he's lucky enough to work only 5 days a week, 250 calories a week, 45 weeks a year, 11,250. Therefore, 1 pound of fat is 3,500. So just this change is 3 to 4 pounds a year, okay? About 2.5 kilos. That's the mess. And most clients you will deal with are not the sort who will suddenly put on 10 or 20 kilos in a short time, right? They're the sort of people who at the age of 45 are 10 kilos, 15 kilos heavier than they were 20. So it just creeps up over time, right? So that's how activity helps. Okay, Pilates and Zumba. What about that? Okay, so Pilates basically consists of low impact flexibility exercises, a lot of muscular strength kind of a thing. The issue with Pilates is it needs to be done under proper supervision, because otherwise you or your client can end up hurting yourself, okay? So that's important. Different things with Pilates, okay? So let's go on to Zumba. Again, high energy workout. Now, if your client enjoys this, by all means do it. But again, high energy, high impact exercise, more likely to cause joint issues. Now, if the person's obese, their chance of having joint and muscle aches are even probably higher than the average person. So you've got to be careful of this, okay? What about yoga? So again, power yoga is there, hot yoga is there, where you're doing it in 40 degrees centigrade. If the person enjoys it, do it. I don't think by itself they're great calorie burners, but if they're going to keep somebody engaged and they're going to sustain it, great, okay? This yoga. Okay, so any more questions? Hang on, you did ask a few more, right? So let's see, we got 1 minute, we'll answer whatever we can. The question was, what do you eat before and after exercise? That's a hot topic, right? In the gym, pre-meal workout, post-meal workout, everybody comes with a big dabba. And in the changing room of the gyms, I call them, they're like milkshake counters. Everybody's going like that, and they're doing that, okay? So my question is, do you need to eat anything more or after? When an obese person is going and do a 30-minute walk on a treadmill, do you really need to eat necessarily before and after? Why do you eat before? You eat before to sustain heavy exercise. You really don't burn your fuel until more than an hour plus. And you're eating post to replenish. But if you've not really burnt anything, what the hell are you replenishing, right? So do you really need to? Simple answer is no. Swimming, great exercise, yes, provided you know how to swim and you have access to a pool, okay? Fitness test, you can do just a simple 6-minute walk test. That's the easiest. Just time them for 6 minutes, see the distance they cover, look at the heart rate, blood pressure before and after. Can you walk after eating? Yes. Okay, so I'm just wrapping it up. Okay, and musculoskeletal issues after going to the gym, you often have people with those because they're going and they're suddenly getting into high intensity before really warming up, okay? So I'm just going to end with this last slide. Bear with me, chairperson, and this is really important. Show of hands, how many people did this morning? Serious question. Okay, in the last 24 hours, hopefully everybody. Okay, so in the last 24 hours, how many did this, or this, or this, or this? As an enlightened crowd, right? So that's the message your patients have to get across. And they'll be successful the day they incorporate physical activity as part of daily life, not when they look upon it as something special. They have won the game the day they feel uncomfortable when they don't exercise versus feeling happy the day they do. And there's a huge difference between the two, okay? So what is the number I told you at the start of the session? 2880, we got 4156. This is my pedometer, okay? So we got 1,200 steps just walking and having fun for 15 minutes. So it's that easy to get 10,000 steps in a day, okay? So thanks for your attention.